So React Flow stores the flow information as an array of nodes and an array of edges. So you can see here in this setup that there is initial nodes, there's an initial nodes array and initial edges array, and those get fed into the initial states of the nodes and the edges. Here we're just using useState, but React Flow also provides another state wrapper of its own, but we don't need it for this example. So the important thing here is that this is React Flow's structure for storing nodes, where the nodes are an array of objects with some built-in properties. So if we jump on over to our little FlowRunner, you can see that in here I've got the same structure, and I've filled that in with some nodes of my own. So here we have an input node which has some text. This may look familiar because the next node is a JSON node that is going to convert this string into a JavaScript object using JavaScript object notation. The next node on the canvas would be a template node, and I'm using mustache templates, and here's my template to format that string. Then I've got two other nodes, a text to uppercase and an output node. Then we have the edges that bind the things together, and you'll notice that the first three edges just go linearly from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4. Then I go from 3 to 5 and 4 to 5. So what that means is here I go from 3 to 5 from my template to my output, and I do an uppercase to output. So at 3 it kind of branches, so that I should, if all things go according to plan, spit out my templated string as it comes out here and convert it to uppercase and do that as well. So let's run that. I've added a set timeout on each loop, on each run, so that we can see for dramatic effect things running in order, and we can see it's gone and traversed that directed graph, and we can see that we've successfully taken our information stored in the JSON and used it in our template string to create a hello Mr. Wiggles, here have 3 pink balloons, and then converted that to uppercase as well. So what's happening here is in the main application, I am setting up a FlowRunner instance, FlowRunner, and FlowRunner is my main class. On FlowRunner, I am calling sync to synchronize the FlowRunner with React Flow's nodes. In this case, it's just mock data imported from mock data, and then I'm executing that flow. In FlowRunner itself, you can see it's a class, and I'm starting off with an empty nodes and edges array. You'll notice that the edges is imported directly from React Flow, but I need to go and add some extra stuff to my nodes. So the sync is just importing edges as is, and for the nodes I have to do a little bit of processing. So I am running through the import nodes, which is then React Flow's data type, and I'm modifying that a little bit, and I'm adding an empty callbacks array, which we'll get to in a bit, and I am loading up the method for this node type. So if we jump on over to here, you can see that for the input node, I'm using the method import, and so on and so forth. So I've just renamed those things on import here, so that if we have a common name, it doesn't clash with anything. So we end up over here with an array of nodes that have been added to with their execution method and an empty array of callbacks. This node needs to know that this node comes after it, so when this node is done, it has a callback for any nodes that are wired into it. And to do that, I run through the edges list, check if I have, search through my nodes to go and grab the source and target nodes, and if I have successfully found a valid source and target node, then I know I've got a valid link, and I can go about setting up a callback on the source node. So I am registering a callback for the target node with the source node. And then I can go and execute that. And the execute node is just a little wrapper here to keep stuff dry. And of course, this is just for the demo that we can remove later. Once I've registered all those callbacks, I've kind of done my setup, and I can go and execute the flow. And all the execute flow function is doing is it's basically just searching through the nodes and seeing any node that doesn't have anything upstream of it is a root node. I'm just doing that with a little root node function here. Jump to that. You can see it's just saying, hey, are there any upstream nodes? If not, I'm a root. So any root in the flow won't be called by anything else, so it needs to be started manually, and I'm just going to go and start that. When a node is executed, you'll notice that we're passing in two things. We're passing in a message object and any data that is stored on the node. And that message object then gets chained through the process. So each node mutates the message and passes that on to all of its callbacks. And we can see what that means in more detail in a second. So you can see here, for the first node, it's of type input, and on the data object, we have an input property with a string. So in the first instance here, we would call the input method by going here. So if the type was input, we would go and run this. Well, we would have stored the input method in the node's method property. So we'd be jumping here and we would start resolving a promise. So first we do a little bit of validation. We just say, hey, does data.input exist? And is it a string? If not, throw an error. And of course, in the future, we'll have to pass that error through to the UI in a little bit more of a more verbose way. But if it is, we can go and mutate our message object and include the data.input as the payload. So that means we've checked this off. So by the time it gets here, the JSON, the function behind the JSON node is going to receive a message object with a payload that is the string. So our JSON object is now coming in here, and we can see we're expecting a message object. Okay, and the same thing is happening here in the JSON node. So you can see we're receiving a message object, and we are trying to parse that. And if we fail to parse it, we just assume that it's a bunch of data that we want to stringify, and we try and stringify it, and if we can't, we reject that. So we are, again, following the same pattern. We mutate our message object and update the payload. So then we move on. So we've processed our JSON node, and we come out the bottom here with a message object passed on to the next node. So here is our template. Following the same pattern again, we receive a message. This time the template, because we want to access the data, we choose to, in our pattern, have data, which is an optional property, optional argument on the method type, And there again, we return a promise, do a little bit of validation. If data.template doesn't exist and data.template wasn't a string, then we know we're not going to be able to get much further, so we can reject that. And if we pass, we can try and use mustache to render that using the message in data scope. We'll using the scope of the message and data object, and if we fail, we're going to throw an error. So checked off here, and it's the same for the rest of it.